Treachery rarely comes wrapped in shadows. It usually wears the familiar face of family. In the bitter winter of 1412, a high-born matriarch struck a bargain that defied all laws of nature and morality. She traded her own flesh and bone, a heavily pregnant daughter, to the very beasts humanity feared most, simply to bury a scandalous secret. What Lady Catherine did not foresee was that her ultimate betrayal would forge a savage dynasty. This is the chronicle of a forsaken girl tossed to the wolves, and the fearsome sovereign who crowned her unborn child as the absolute ruler of the wild. The courtyard of Blackwood Manor was buried under a foot of pristine, undisturbed snow, but by midnight it would be trampled by the heavy, clawed boots of monsters. Genevieve stood by the frosted glass of her bedchamber window, her hands resting protectively over the heavy, aching swell of her 7-month pregnancy. At 19, she had been the jewel of House Blackwood, possessing a delicate beauty that her mother, Lady Catherine, had intended to sell to the highest noble bidder. But Genevieve had ruined those meticulous plans. She had fallen in love with a commoner, a farrier named Thomas, whose broad shoulders and quiet kindness had offered her an escape from the suffocating politics of her noble life. When Lady Catherine discovered the affair, her retribution had been swift and absolute. Thomas vanished in the dead of night, leaving behind nothing but a blood-stained apron in the stables. The official story was that he had fled after stealing horses. Genevieve knew the dark, terrible truth, but she had been locked in her quarters, kept out of sight as her belly grew, a living monument to her family's shame. The heavy oak door to her chamber unlocked with a harsh clank. Lady Catherine stepped in, flanked by 2 burly household guards. Catherine was a woman carved from ice, her posture rigidly perfect, her eyes devoid of maternal warmth. "Dress yourself in your warmest cloak, Genevieve," Catherine commanded, her voice slicing through the frigid air of the room. "You are leaving." Genevieve turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Leaving? Mother, it is the dead of winter. The roads to the abbeys are impassable." She had assumed for months that she would be sent to a distant convent to give birth in secret, the child taken away to be raised by monks while she lived out her days in quiet penitence. "You are not going to an abbey," Catherine said smoothly, stepping closer. Her gaze dropped to Genevieve's swollen abdomen with undisguised disgust. "The Duke of Somerset arrives in 3 days to finalize his betrothal to your younger sister, Beatrice. I will not have a ruined, pregnant whore in my household to jeopardize this union. The Duke despises scandal." "Then hide me in the cellar. Lock me in the attic," Genevieve pleaded, panic rising in her throat as the guard stepped forward, producing heavy iron shackles. "Mother, please. The babe is due in 2 months. I cannot survive the frozen roads." "You will not be on the roads for long," Catherine replied, her tone chillingly detached. "I have made a pact, a lucrative one, secured with the very creatures that terrorize our northern borders. They require human tribute to maintain the peace treaty. In exchange for you, our lands will be spared from their raids for a decade, and I will be paid a chest of raw gold." The color drained entirely from Genevieve's face. The northern borders were the domain of the Iron Fang Pack, lichens, werewolves, creatures of nightmare that walked as men but tore through villages like feral gods. They were known to eat human flesh, to enslave women, to slaughter without mercy. "You are selling me to the beasts?" Genevieve whispered, her legs giving out. The guards caught her roughly by the arms, dragging her upright and locking the cold iron cuffs around her wrists. "Mother, no! They will tear me apart! They will eat my child!" "Your child is a bastard born of a stable boy," Catherine sneered, turning her back. "It is a stain on our lineage. If the wolves consume you both, It is a merciful erasure of my greatest failure. Take her to the courtyard." Genevieve screamed, fighting against the men with a frantic, animalistic desperation. But her pregnant body was heavy and clumsy. She was dragged down the winding stone staircases, her velvet slippers tearing against the rough steps. The castle staff averted their eyes, terrified of Lady Catherine's wrath. In the snowy courtyard, the wind howled like a mourner. Standing by the iron gates were 3 towering figures. Even in their human forms, they were terrifyingly unnatural. They wore heavy pelts of bear and direwolf, their skin scarred, their eyes glowing with a faint, luminous amber in the torchlight. They did not shiver in the biting frost. The leader, a massive man with a jagged scar across his jaw, stepped forward. He tossed a heavy, leather-bound chest at Catherine's feet. The lid burst open, spilling glittering gold coins onto the white snow. "The tribute, as agreed," the wolf rasped, his voice sounding like stones grinding together. His glowing eyes locked onto Genevieve, taking in her swollen belly. A strange, low rumble vibrated in his chest. "She is heavy with young." "That was not excluded in our terms," Catherine said, pulling her fur mantle tighter. "Take her. She is yours to devour, to enslave, to do with as your Alpha King pleases. Never show her face in this kingdom again." The wolf smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be human. "Our king will find exquisite use for her." Before Genevieve could beg one last time, a heavy sack was thrown over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. She was hoisted over a massive, muscular shoulder as effortlessly as if she were a sack of grain. As she was carried out into the howling blizzard, the last sound she heard was the heavy iron gates of her home slamming shut forever. The journey was a blur of agonizing cold, the rhythmic jolting of a horse's gait, and the terrifying, omnipresent scent of wet fur, pine, and raw meat. Genevieve wept until she was dehydrated, her hands instinctively clutching her stomach through the coarse fabric of the sack. She prayed for a swift death. She prayed that the monsters would snap her neck before they cut the baby from her womb. After what felt like days, the freezing air shifted. The biting wind died down, replaced by the warmth of massive, roaring hearths. The sack was abruptly yanked from her head, leaving her gasping in the sudden, blinding light. She collapsed onto a floor of polished black stone, shivering violently. As her vision cleared, she realized she was not in a crude cave or a dirt-floored den, as the stories claimed. She was in a colossal, ancient throne room, carved directly into the heart of a mountain. Vast obsidian pillars stretched up into shadowy vaults, and giant tapestries depicting brutal hunts and howling wolves adorned the stone walls. Surrounding her were dozens of them, men and women impossibly beautiful, but possessing a predatory grace that made Genevieve's blood run cold. They watched her in utter silence, their golden and green eyes unblinking. "Leave us." The voice did not boom, yet it echoed through the cavernous hall with an absolute, terrifying authority. The pack instantly bowed their heads and retreated into the shadows, leaving Genevieve alone on the floor. She looked up. Sitting upon a throne of iron and fused bones was the Alpha King. King Leander was a myth made flesh. He was a giant of a man, his broad chest wrapped in a dark tunic lined with silver wolf fur. His hair was black as a raven's wing, sweeping back from a face of aristocratic, albeit brutal, perfection. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from Genevieve's lungs. They were the piercing, crystalline blue of a frozen glacier, radiating an ancient, calculating intelligence. He stood, his movements possessing a terrifying fluidity, and descended the dais. Every step he took seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. Genevieve pressed herself backward, her chains clinking against the black marble. Leander stopped a mere foot away from her. He knelt, invading her space, the sheer heat radiating from his massive body, combating the chill in her bones. He leaned in, closing his eyes, and took a deep, slow breath near the crook of her neck. Genevieve whimpered, turning her face away, expecting teeth to sink into her jugular. Instead, Leander's eyes snapped open, a violent shock registering in his icy gaze. He stared directly at her swollen belly. "The scent," he murmured, his voice a dangerous velvet purr, iron, oak, and wild rain. "Who sired the pup you carry, human?" "He was a farrier," Genevieve stammered, tears spilling over her lashes. "His name was Thomas." "Please, my lord, he was just a common man. My mother had him killed. Please just kill me quickly. Spare the child the pain." "Thomas," Leander interrupted, tasting the name with a curled lip. "Did this Thomas have a birthmark on his left shoulder blade? The shape of a crescent moon." Genevieve froze, her sobbing catching in her throat. She looked at the terrifying Alpha King in bewilderment. How could you possibly know that?" Leander stood up to his full, towering height, a low, rumbling laugh echoing from his chest. It was a sound of absolute triumph. "Because, little bird, your mother is a spectacular fool." He turned and paced before the throne, his eyes burning with sudden, terrifying intensity. 50 years ago, a faction of my pack rebelled. They were led by my brother, a pure-blood alpha. We warred, and I slaughtered them all, save for his infant son, who was spirited away across the human border to be hidden among your kind. A boy of pure royal lichen blood, living as a human, ignorant of his own nature because his wolf was suppressed by magic. Genevieve's mind spun, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the revelation. You mean Thomas was—" "My nephew," Leander finished, turning back to her. "The last living heir of the Crescent bloodline. Your mother thought she was disposing of a human bastard and a ruined daughter. Instead, she has delivered to my doorstep the final piece of my dynasty." Leander stepped forward, reaching down. For a moment, Genevieve flinched, but his massive, calloused hands gently grasped her manacled wrists. With a sharp, metallic crack, he snapped the heavy iron chains as if they were made of brittle glass. "You are no longer a prisoner, Genevieve of House Blackwood," Leander declared, his voice carrying the weight of unbreakable law. "You carry royal lichen blood within your womb. You are the vessel of the next Alpha King. From this moment on, you belong to the Iron Fang pack, and anyone who so much as bruises your skin will suffer a death so prolonged they will beg for hell." Genevieve stared at him, rubbing her bruised wrists, the reality of her survival colliding violently with the madness of her situation. She had been sold as meat, only to be crowned as the mother of a monster. For the next 2 months, Genevieve lived in a state of surreal, opulent captivity within the mountain fortress of Silver Pines. She was given chambers adorned with the finest silks and warmest furs. A fire roared perpetually in her hearth, and she was fed rich meats, exotic fruits, and bone broths laced with herbs that made her feel stronger than she ever had in the human kingdom. Yet, the psychological toll was immense. She was surrounded by predators. The women who attended her, fierce female warriors who viewed human women with disdain, treated her with a bizarre, clinical reverence. They did not care for Genevieve. They cared only for the bulge of her stomach. They would randomly press their ears to her belly, their eyes glowing as they listened to the unnaturally strong heartbeat of the pup inside. King Leander visited her every evening. He was a terrifying presence, demanding reports on what she ate, how she slept, and if she felt any pain. He never touched her with cruelty, but his obsession with the unborn child was suffocating. He viewed Genevieve as sacred soil holding a divine seed, nothing more. "He is restless today," Leander noted one cold night, standing by the fire, observing her as she winced from a sharp kick against her ribs. "He is strong," Genevieve replied quietly, resting a protective hand over the spot. "Too strong." "He is an alpha," Leander corrected. "He requires more room than your frail human body can provide. The birth will test you, little bird." His words proved horrifically prophetic. 3 weeks later, beneath the light of a swollen, blood-red moon, the contractions began. The pain was not human. It felt as though a creature with claws was trying to rip its way out of her spine. Genevieve screamed, thrashing against the silk sheets as her lichen midwives held her down with unyielding, terrifying strength. The chamber was sweltering, the smell of sweat, blood, and fear heavy in the air. "Push, human," snarled Beta Cedric, the pack's chief healer, his hands coated in her blood. "The pup's heart beats too fast. He shifts within the womb. You must push." "I can't," Genevieve shrieked, her vision going white as a fresh wave of agony tore through her pelvis. "It's tearing me apart. Oh God, let me die." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors blasted open. King Leander strode into the room, the raw, suffocating aura of the alpha blanketing the chamber. The midwives immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads, leaving Genevieve gasping on the bed. Leander ignored them all, walking straight to the edge of the mattress. He grabbed Genevieve's sweaty, thrashing face between his massive hands. His icy blue eyes locked onto her terrified brown ones, forcing her to focus. "You will not die tonight," Leander commanded, his voice vibrating with an ancient, dark power that seemed to penetrate her very soul. "You are the mother of the Iron Fang heir. You are stronger than the weakling blood your mother cursed you with. Push, Genevieve. Give me my king." Driven by a mixture of terror, adrenaline, and a sudden, inexplicable surge of strength drawn from the alpha's presence, Genevieve let out a primal scream that tore her vocal cords. She pushed with everything she had left, her body convulsing violently. A sharp, wet cry pierced the heavy silence of the room. It was not the soft wail of a human infant. It was a resonant, furious sound, a howl trapped in a tiny human throat. Genevieve collapsed back onto the pillows, panting, on the verge of unconsciousness. Through her blurred vision, she watched Beta Cedric sever the cord and hand the screaming, bloody infant to King Leander. Leander took the child in his massive, scarred hands. He walked to the roaring hearth, holding the boy up to the firelight. The baby had a shock of raven hair, and as he opened his eyes, they glowed a brilliant, luminescent gold. On his left shoulder blade, clearly visible through the gore of birth, was the distinct, dark mark of a crescent moon. "Perfect," Leander whispered, a terrifying smile gracing his severe features. He dipped his thumb into a bowl of black soot near the hearth and smeared a thick line across the infant's forehead, sealing him in the ancient tradition of the pack. "Hear me, ancestors of the Silver Pines. I present to you Alaric, son of Thomas, blood of my blood, the true heir to the Iron Throne." A massive, unified howl erupted outside the fortress walls, vibrating through the stone as the pack sensed the birth of their future king. Leander turned back to the bed. He walked over and gently laid the swaddled, suddenly quiet infant onto Genevieve's exhausted chest. The moment the baby felt her warmth, he nuzzled into her neck, the fierce golden glow fading from his eyes to reveal soft, human brown. "You have done well, Mother of the King," Leander said softly, an unprecedented edge of respect in his tone. "Your place in this pack is eternal." as Genevieve clutched her son, feeling the unnatural, terrifying heat of his small body. A fundamental shift occurred within her. The terrified, discarded human girl died on that bloody bed. In her place, a cold, calculating survivor was born. Her mother had thrown her to the beasts to destroy her, but Lady Catherine had miscalculated terribly. By selling her, Catherine had placed Genevieve at the right hand of the most powerful army in the north, giving her a weapon forged of lichen blood and absolute loyalty. Genevieve looked down at little Alaric, gently stroking his dark hair, a dangerous vow forming in her mind. "Grow strong, my little wolf," she thought, her eyes hardening as she stared into the fire. "Grow strong, and one day we will return to Blackwood Manor, and we will tear it down to the foundation." Time in the Silver Pines didn't pass. It hardened. 18 brutal, unforgiving winters forged the infant Alaric into a physical marvel, while those same years sculpted Genevieve from a discarded, terrified girl into the formidable bedrock of the Iron Fang pack. She was no longer a prisoner, nor merely a breeding vessel. She was the Iron Mother. Genevieve had learned early that to survive among monsters, one had to master the monsters' minds. She did not possess fangs or claws, but she wielded an intellect sharper than silver. She sat at King Leander's right hand during council meetings, translating the convoluted political letters from the southern human kingdoms, realms dominated by names that carried weight in the mortal world, like the ambitious House of Cavendish and the ruthless Duke of Somerset, Henry Beaufort. Leander commanded the pack's lethal physical might, but Genevieve directed their strategy, teaching the feral lords the art of human espionage, trade blockades, and psychological warfare. Alaric grew up suspended between these two worlds. Physically, he was a terrifying echo of his great-uncle Leander and his murdered father, Thomas. At 18, he stood 6 feet and 4 inches tall, his shoulders broad, and his muscles coiled with the explosive tension unique to lichen royalty. His hair remained as dark as a raven's wing, but his eyes were a startling, calculating brown that flashed to a predatory, luminescent gold whenever his temper flared. Yet, there was unrest within the cavernous halls of the mountain fortress. Pureblood lichens are creatures of ancient, rigid tradition, and a faction within the pack despised the idea of bowing to a boy born of a human womb. This simmering rebellion was spearheaded by Cassian, a towering, battle-scarred alpha of the eastern ridges. Cassian believed the Crescent bloodline was diluted, tainted by Genevieve's mortal frailty. The tension snapped during the festival of the winter solstice, a sacred pack tradition where the young warriors demonstrated their prowess in the fighting pits, a massive, circular arena carved from the mountain's bedrock. The rules were primal: no weapons, only teeth, claws, and raw strength. Genevieve sat beside Leander on the obsidian dais, her dark velvet cloak lined with snow fox fur, her face an unreadable mask of calm. Below them, Alaric stood bare-chested in the freezing air, his breath pluming in white clouds. Cassian's eldest son steps into the pit, Leander murmured, his icy blue eyes narrowing as a massive, heavily muscled lichen named Roderick dropped down onto the blood-stained sand. Roderick is fully shifted. He is a pure blood. Alaric has not yet experienced his first turning. He fights as a man against a beast. Alaric does not need fur to break him, Genevieve replied smoothly, her gaze never wavering from her son. I did not raise a mindless animal, Leander. I raised a king. The heavy war drums pounded a singular, deafening beat, and the fight began. Roderick did not hesitate. With a guttural roar, his bones cracked and realigned in a sickening symphony of shifting anatomy. Within seconds, a monstrous, 9-foot-tall direwolf with matted grey fur and jaws capable of snapping an oak tree lunged across the arena. The pack roared in anticipation of Alaric's slaughter, but Alaric did not brace for impact, nor did he attempt to match the beast's impossible strength. Instead, he remembered his mother's whispered lessons in the firelight. Lycans fight with pride, Alaric. They rely on their sheer invincibility. Pride makes them blind. Use their momentum as your weapon. As the massive jaws snapped shut inches from his face, Alaric dropped to his knees, sliding under the beast's leaping trajectory on the frozen sand. In a flash of lethal precision, he drove a heavy, iron-shod boot directly into the weakest joint of Roderick's hind leg. The sickening crack of shattering bone echoed over the drums. Roderick howled, a sound of profound agony, crashing into the stone wall of the pit. Before the beast could recover, Alaric was upon him. He did not use claws. He used leverage. Wrapping his thick arms around the direwolf's thick neck, Alaric applied a brutal, suffocating chokehold, dodging the frantic, slashing claws with terrifying, preternatural speed. The beast thrashed, tearing deep gashes into Alaric's ribs, but the young heir did not let go. His brown eyes flared into brilliant, blinding gold. He squeezed until the massive wolf choked, its eyes rolling back, before forcing the creature down into the dirt, pinning its throat under his knee. Silence descended upon the arena. The purebloods stared in absolute shock. A half-human boy had just subjugated a shifted pureblood without shedding his human skin. Alaric looked up at the stands, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his ribs. His golden eyes locked directly onto Cassian. "Your blood may be pure, Cassian," Alaric's voice boomed, carrying the heavy, commanding resonance of the alpha frequency. "But your tactics are weak. I am the Iron Fang heir. Who else wishes to test the strength of my mother's blood?" No one moved. On the dais, Leander let out a low, rumbling laugh of pure, vindicated triumph. He looked at Genevieve, a profound respect burning in his gaze. "He is exactly as you promised, Genevieve. A perfect weapon." Genevieve offered a cool, aristocratic smile, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "A weapon is only as good as the hand that wields it, my king. And it is time we pointed him south." The victory in the pits cemented Alaric's authority, but it also triggered a catastrophic chain of events that would force the Iron Fang pack out of their mountain isolation. 3 weeks after the solstice, a human envoy breached the northern borders. They marched under a flag of truce, bearing the royal crest of the Duke of Somerset, a crimson lion rampant on a field of gold. Leander, curious and deeply suspicious, allowed them entry into the great hall. Genevieve sat rigidly on her carved wooden chair beside the iron throne, her blood running instantly cold. Leading the envoy was Lord Arthur Harrington, a sneering, heavily perfumed nobleman who had once been a frequent guest at Blackwood Manor. He was Lady Catherine's closest political ally. Harrington stood before the towering Lycan king, trembling slightly beneath his heavy velvet coat, though he tried to mask his terror with aristocratic arrogance. He did not recognize Genevieve. The frightened pregnant girl of 19 had been replaced by a regal, cold-eyed woman of 37, her dark hair threaded with silver, radiating quiet, lethal authority. "King Leander," Harrington began, unrolling a heavy parchment scroll, "I bring greetings from Henry Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and his mother-in-law, Lady Catherine of House Blackwood. They seek to renew the peace treaty established 18 years ago. In exchange for your continued confinement to the northern woods, they offer a tribute of fine southern wines, silk, and 50 heads of cattle." Leander leaned forward, resting his heavy chin on a scarred fist. "Catherine of Blackwood, a name I remember well. Tell me, human, Why does the Duke send his wife's mother to negotiate treaties? Lady Catherine is a woman of profound foresight, Harrington replied smoothly. She wishes to ensure the safety of her expanding estates. Genevieve leaned toward Leander, her voice a barely audible whisper, meant only for his sensitive ears. It is a trap. My mother does not yield. She exterminates. She is probing our defenses. Leander gave a microscopic nod. We accept the tribute, Lord Harrington. Tonight you shall feast with us to seal this renewed pact. The feast that evening was a tense, opulent affair. Torches blazed, roasting massive boars on iron spits. Harrington and his guards were seated at the lower tables, sweating profusely as the pack watched them with hungry, unblinking eyes. Genevieve watched the human servants carefully as they poured the tribute wine from heavy, gilded decanters. Harrington stood, raising a silver goblet. To the prolonged peace between our realms, Harrington announced, his voice carrying a slight, nervous tremor. May this vintage warm your blood against the northern chill. Alaric, seated to Genevieve's left, reached for his goblet. His wounds from the pit had healed perfectly, leaving only pale, jagged scars across his ribs. He raised the cup to his lips. As the dark red liquid sloshed against the silver rim, Genevieve's sharp eyes caught a faint, oily sheen on the surface of the wine. At the same moment, a familiar, acrid scent cut through the aroma of roasted meat and pine, a scent she had spent years studying in Leander's botanical texts. Liquid wolfsbane, refined with mercury, lethal to lichens, tasteless in heavy wine. "Alaric, stop!" Genevieve screamed, her composure shattering. She lunged sideways, violently slapping the silver goblet from her son's hand. The heavy cup clattered across the stone floor, spilling the dark red vintage. Where the wine touched the cracks in the stone floor, it began to hiss, a foul, yellowish smoke rising into the air. Chaos erupted instantly, Harrington's face drained of color. "Kill them!" he shrieked, dropping his own cup and drawing a concealed crossbow from beneath his cloak. His guards, throwing off their mantles, revealed heavy silver swords, weapons forged specifically to butcher wolves. A crossbow bolt, tipped with a core of solid silver, flew directly at Genevieve's chest. She didn't have time to blink, let alone dodge. But Alaric did. With a roar that shook the soot from the cavern ceiling, Alaric threw his massive body in front of his mother. The silver bolt buried itself deep into his shoulder. To a normal lichen, refined silver in the bloodstream was a paralyzing, agonizing poison. It should have dropped him to his knees. Instead, the pain acted as a catalyst. The suppression of his human blood evaporated, and the ancient, volatile power of the crescent line violently broke free. Right before Genevieve's terrified eyes, her son began his first shift. It was a display of terrifying, biblical violence. Alaric's clothes shredded as his body expanded massively, bones elongating, muscles swelling to monstrous proportions. Coarse, midnight black fur erupted from his skin, his jaw cracked open, extending into a horrifying, elongated snout filled with rows of razor-sharp, ivory teeth. But it was his size that paralyzed the room. When the shift was complete, Alaric did not look like a normal lichen. He was an apex predator of nightmare proportions, easily standing 12 feet tall on his hind legs, a hulking mass of dark muscle and absolute fury. His eyes burned like miniature suns, a blinding, furious gold. Harrington's guards froze, their silver swords suddenly looking like pathetic children's toys. Alaric lunged. He did not fight with the calculated leverage he had used in the pits. He fought with the unleashed, apocalyptic wrath of a provoked god. He caught the first guard in his massive jaws, cleanly severing the man's torso in a single, sickening crunch. He swiped a massive, clawed hand at the second, sending the man flying through the air to shatter against an obsidian pillar. Harrington scrambled backward, weeping in terror, trying to reload his crossbow. A massive, furred hand slammed down onto Harrington's chest, pinning him to the stone floor. Alaric loomed over the human lord, hot drool dripping from his fangs onto Harrington's terrified face. "Hold, Alaric!" Leander's voice cut through the carnage like a whip. The Alpha King strode forward, his own eyes glowing a dangerous blue. He looked down at the trembling Harrington, then up at the monstrous form of his nephew. "Do not kill him yet," Leander commanded. "We need his tongue." Alaric growled, a sound that vibrated the marrow in Genevieve's bones, but he obeyed, stepping back, though his golden eyes remained fixed on the human. Slowly, agonizingly, Alaric's massive form began to shrink, the fur receding, the bones snapping back into a human configuration until he knelt naked on the stone floor, panting heavily, blood smearing his lips. Genevieve rushed forward, wrapping her heavy fur cloak around her son's shaking shoulders. She inspected the wound where the silver bolt had struck. His lichen healing was already pushing the metal out, the flesh sizzling as it rejected the poison. She turned her gaze to Lord Harrington, her brown eyes hardening into chips of flint. She walked slowly toward the terrified nobleman, her velvet skirts brushing the blood-stained floor. "Lord Harrington," Genevieve said quietly, standing over him. Harrington looked up, his eyes widening in sudden, horrific recognition as he finally saw past the age and the regal attire, recognizing the delicate facial structure of a girl who had vanished 18 years ago. Lady Genevieve?" he choked out, entirely horrified. "But you were fed to the beasts. You are dead." "I was reborn," Genevieve corrected coldly. She crouched down, her face inches from his. "You will ride back to Blackwood Manor. You will tell my mother, Lady Catherine, and you will tell the Duke of Somerset that their tribute is rejected." Genevieve stood up, gesturing to the towering, blood-soaked form of her son, who was currently being helped to his feet by Leander. "You will tell them that Genevieve of House Blackwood still lives," she continued, her voice echoing through the silent, captivated hall. "And you will tell them that I am coming home to claim my inheritance. I am bringing the Iron Fang pack. I am bringing the Alpha King. And most importantly, I am bringing my son." She leaned down, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Tell my mother the bastard she threw into the snow is coming to take her crown." Lord Arthur Harrington didn't stop riding until his third horse collapsed, its lungs bursting in the freezing mud just miles from the borders of the southern kingdoms. By the time he reached the towering, iron-wrought gates of Blackwood Manor, he was a fractured shell of the arrogant envoy who had marched north. He was covered in frozen mud, his fine velvet coat stained with the blood of his slaughtered guards, and his eyes were wide with a madness born of absolute terror. Inside the Grand Council chamber of Blackwood Manor, the atmosphere was suffocatingly opulent. Lady Catherine, now a woman in her late 50s, sat beside the roaring hearth. Age had not softened her. It had only sharpened her cheekbones and turned her heart to absolute frost. Across from her sat her son-in-law, Henry Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, a man of immense wealth, draped in ermine, whose political ambitions were matched only by his profound cruelty. Beside him was Beatrice, Genevieve's younger sister, nursing a goblet of spiced wine and looking profoundly bored. The heavy oak doors of the chamber burst open, shattering the quiet. Harrington collapsed onto the polished marble floor, gasping for air, his hands bleeding from gripping the reins for 3 days and nights. "Harrington!" Duke Henry stood, his face darkening with rage at the intrusion. "What is the meaning of this? Where is the treaty? Where are your guards?" "Dead," Harrington choked out, coughing violently as servants rushed to lift him. He looked directly at Lady Catherine, his eyes trembling with a horrifying revelation. "They are all dead, Your Grace. The poison, it failed. It only made the beast stronger." Catherine's expression remained an unreadable mask of pale stone, though her knuckles turned white where she gripped the arms of her chair. "You failed to poison the Alpha King." "Not the king," Harrington wept, his voice cracking hysterically. "The heir. The young heir." He took the silver and he shifted. "But my lady, the heir is not just a wolf. He is a god of death. And his mother." Harrington's breath hitched, the memory of the cavern dragging him into a panic attack. "His mother is Lady Genevieve." The name dropped into the room like a physical weight. The fire in the hearth seemed to dim. Beatrice dropped her silver goblet, the red wine spilling across the marble like fresh blood. "Genevieve is dead," Catherine stated, her voice devoid of emotion, though a dangerous edge of denial laced the words. "She was fed to the Iron Fang pack 18 years ago. I saw the beasts take her with my own eyes." "She was not eaten, my lady," Harrington screamed, struggling against the servants holding him. "They crowned her. She sits at the right hand of King Leander. The boy, the monstrous heir, is the bastard you threw into the snow. He is the son of the farrier, and he possesses the ancient royal blood of the Lycans." Duke Henry's face turned a mottled, furious purple. He rounded on his mother-in-law, his hand dropping to the hilt of his gilded sword. "You told me the girl was dead. You told me there were no loose ends when I married Beatrice and merged our estates. If a living, breathing heir to the Blackwood estate returns, backed by an army of apex predators, my claim to these lands is entirely compromised." "Silence, Henry," Catherine hissed, standing up to her full, imposing height. She refused to let fear conquer her. She was the architect of House Blackwood. She had survived famines, plagues, and kings. She would not be undone by a ghost. "They are beasts, mindless, feral creatures. If they march south, they will hit the fortified garrisons of the earldom of Westmoreland long before they reach our gates. Send ravens to the capital. Hire the Flemish mercenaries. Empty the treasury if you must. We will bathe the northern roads in silver." But Lady Catherine's fatal flaw had always been her arrogance. She fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the enemy coming for her. Hundreds of miles to the north, within the cavernous depths of the Silver Pines, Genevieve stood over a massive map, carved from a slab of polished slate. The map detailed every river, valley, garrison, and fortress of the southern kingdoms. She was no longer dressed in the heavy, ornamental furs of a captive queen. Genevieve wore a fitted bodice of reinforced blackened leather, her silver-streaked hair braided tightly against her skull in the warrior fashion of the Lycan females. She traced a long, slender finger down a carved line representing the White River. "The Duke will expect us to march down the King's Road," Genevieve said, her voice echoing clearly in the war room. Standing around her were the towering alpha generals of the pack, including King Leander, Cassian, and her son, Alaric. He will position his artillery and his silver-tipped phalanxes in the bottleneck of the Westmoreland Pass. He expects wolves. He expects a mindless, chaotic charge. Cassian, the scarred alpha who had once doubted her son, leaned heavily on the table. Since Alaric had spared his son's life in the fighting pits, Cassian's loyalty to the Iron Mother had become absolute. "And what does the Iron Mother suggest?" "We do not march on the road," Genevieve replied, her brown eyes cold and calculating. "Lycans do not tire like human horses. You do not freeze. We cross the White River. We scale the jagged cliffs of the Whispering Peaks, terrain no human army could ever traverse, and we drop directly into the Blackwood Valley, behind their defensive lines. We bypass the Duke's mercenary army entirely. Leander smiled, a terrifying expression that revealed the tips of his elongated canines. A siege? No, Alaric spoke up. His voice possessed the dark, rumbling cadence of the alpha frequency, commanding instant silence from the generals. He looked at his mother, a silent understanding passing between them. A massacre. We strike at midnight. We cut off their ravens. We slaughter their scouts. And we burn the armory before they can draw a single silver blade. I want my grandmother to wake up to the smell of her own burning legacy. The march of the Iron Fang pack was a terrifying marvel of unnatural logistics. 10,000 shifted lichens moved through the deepest, most treacherous winter snows in absolute, predatory silence. They did not light campfires. They did not blow war horns. They moved like a shadow across the face of the earth, guided by the tactical genius of a human woman who had memorized every secret path of her childhood home. As they crested the treacherous, icy summits of the Whispering Peaks, the sprawling, opulent estate of Blackwood Manor finally came into view in the valley below. It was a fortress of pale stone and dark slate, heavily guarded by patrolling soldiers bearing the Duke's crimson lion crest. Genevieve sat atop a massive, midnight black destrier, a war horse specially bred by the pack to tolerate the scent of wolves. Beside her stood Alaric, fully shifted into his towering 12-foot monstrous form, his golden eyes locked onto the distant castle. Leander stood on her other side, his massive arms crossed, the winter wind whipping his dark fur cloak. Genevieve pulled a heavy iron pocket watch from her leather coat. She checked the time, then snapped it shut. "It is time," Genevieve said quietly, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "Spare the servants if they flee, but any man bearing the crest of the Crimson Lion and any guard loyal to House Blackwood is to be eradicated." Leander raised his head to the swollen, silver moon hanging in the black sky. He unleashed a howl that shattered the silence of the valley, a sound of pure, ancient warfare. 10,000 lichens answered him, the combined resonance shaking the snow from the pine trees. The avalanche of fur, teeth, and iron descended upon Blackwood Manor. The assault was over before the Duke's heavily paid commanders could even pull on their boots. The Flemish mercenaries, accustomed to fighting other humans on open battlefields, were entirely unprepared for the sheer, vertical speed of the lichen vanguard. Massive wolves scaled the 40-foot stone walls of the manor, using only their claws, tearing the archers from the parapets before a single arrow could be nocked. The heavy oak and iron gates were not battered down by rams. They were literally ripped from their hinges by Leander and a dozen pure-blood alphas, the grinding screech of tearing metal echoing for miles. Within the manor, panic was absolute. Duke Henry Beaufort, stripped of his usual arrogance, ran through the opulent corridors in his silken nightclothes, dragging Beatrice by the wrist. "To the cellars!" Henry screamed, his face entirely devoid of color, as the horrific sounds of tearing flesh and dying men echoed from the courtyard. "We can escape through the crypts." "My mother!" Beatrice cried, stumbling over her velvet skirts. "We cannot leave, Lady Catherine." "Your mother is a dead woman," Henry snarled, pulling her violently toward the servants' stairwell. "She brought this curse upon us. Let the beasts have her." Before they could reach the door, the heavy stained glass window at the end of the corridor shattered inward. A massive, hulking shape landed gracefully on the Persian carpet amidst the shower of colored glass. Alaric rose to his full, terrifying height. In his shifted form, he took up the entire width of the grand hallway. His midnight fur was slick with the blood of the Duke's elite guard, and his golden eyes locked onto Henry with a terrifying predatory focus. A low, vibrating growl emanated from his chest, shaking the paintings on the walls. Henry dropped Beatrice's hand and drew a silver dagger from his belt, holding it out with a trembling hand. "Stay back, you demon. I am the Duke of Somerset. My king will rain fire upon your cursed woods." Alaric did not roar. He simply stepped forward, swatting the silver dagger away with the back of his massive clawed hand. The blade shattered against the stone wall. In one fluid, brutal motion, Alaric clamped his massive hand around Henry's throat, lifting the struggling Duke 3 feet off the ground. Beatrice screamed, pressing herself against the wall, sobbing hysterically. Alaric looked at his trembling aunt. He leaned in, his monstrous snout inches from her face, and exhaled a hot breath smelling of copper and pine. But he did not bite her. He simply turned back down the corridor, dragging the choking Duke of Somerset effortlessly toward the Great Hall. In the Great Hall, surrounded by the shattered remnants of her elite household guard, Lady Catherine sat upon the high seat of her ancestral home. She was dressed in her finest morning gown of black velvet, her posture rigidly perfect, her hands folded in her lap. She refused to cower. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the snarling, blood-soaked ranks of the Iron Fang pack parted. Genevieve walked into the great hall of her ancestors. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the massive hearth and the desperate, gurgling gasps of Duke Henry, whom Alaric had casually tossed to the floor at Genevieve's feet. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply stared at one another. 18 years had passed since that freezing night in the courtyard. The power dynamic had violently, irrevocably shifted. "You look well, Genevieve," Catherine said finally, her voice remarkably steady, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of profound disbelief at the commanding, hardened warrior standing before her. "The North seems to have toughened your constitution." "And you look exactly as I left you, Mother," Genevieve replied smoothly, her voice carrying the cold, resonating authority she had honed over decades of ruling predators. "Sitting on a throne built on the bones of those you deemed disposable, trapped in a cage of your own pride." Catherine stood up slowly. "You have brought a horde of monsters into our home. You have slaughtered good Christian men. You are a traitor to your bloodline." "My bloodline?" Genevieve stepped forward, her boots clicking sharply against the marble. "My bloodline is the boy you sold to the beasts to cover your own political embarrassments. My bloodline is the king who now holds your precious duke's life in his hands." At her words, Alaric stepped forward. He closed his eyes, his massive form shimmering as bones cracked and fur receded. Within seconds, he stood naked and human before them, the dark crescent moon birthmark stark against his pale shoulder blade. One of the Lycan generals immediately draped a heavy fur mantle over his broad shoulders. Catherine stared at the tall, dark-haired young man. She saw the undeniable aristocratic features of her own husband in his jawline, mixed with the rugged, undeniable strength of the farrier she had murdered. "I am Alaric," he said, his human voice deep and lethal, "son of Thomas, heir to the Iron Fang pack, and the rightful lord of Blackwood." Duke Henry, coughing blood onto the marble, scrambled to his knees, grasping desperately at Genevieve's leather boots. Lady Genevieve, please. I knew nothing of your mother's treachery. I only married Beatrice for the land. I will grant you a full pardon from the crown. I will give you half my treasury. Just spare my life, I beg of you." Genevieve looked down at the pathetic, groveling Duke. She felt no pity. She looked back up at her mother, seeing the flash of disgust cross Catherine's stoic face. "You see, Mother?" Genevieve said softly. "The men you sell your soul to align with are cowards when faced with true power. They shatter like glass." Genevieve turned her gaze to Alaric. "The Duke's fate is yours, my king." Alaric looked at Henry Beaufort. His eyes flashed briefly to luminescent gold. "Lycans do not respect cowards," he stated coldly. He stepped forward and, with a single, sickeningly swift motion, snapped the Duke's neck. Henry collapsed to the floor like a discarded marionette. Catherine flinched, her stoic facade finally cracking as the reality of her total defeat set in. She was surrounded by monsters. Her son-in-law was dead. Her daughter was a queen of the wild. Her legacy was ashes. "Go on, then," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling for the very first time. She closed her eyes, exposing her throat. "Order your beast to tear out my throat. Complete your vengeance, Genevieve." Genevieve walked slowly up the steps of the dais. She stood inches from the mother who had thrown her into the freezing darkness. "Death is a mercy reserved for warriors, Mother," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. "I have not come to kill you. I have come to return a favor." Genevieve turned to face the great hall. Strip her of her silks. Dress her in the rags of the lowest scullery maid. Take her name, take her signet ring, and cast her out into the blizzard. Let her walk the frozen roads of the southern kingdoms as a nameless beggar. If she survives the winter, it will be a testament to her sheer spite. But she will never set foot in Blackwood Manor again. Catherine's eyes snapped open in absolute horror. "No, Genevieve, you cannot. I am Lady Blackwood. I am of noble blood. The winter will kill me. It is a death sentence." "It is exactly what you gave me," Genevieve replied, her face a mask of iron. She turned her back on her mother, walking down the steps to stand beside her son. "Take her." The Lycan guards moved forward, seizing the screaming, thrashing Lady Catherine, dragging her out of the great hall and into the howling, unforgiving winter night. The heavy iron doors slammed shut, echoing with the finality of a tomb, sealing out Catherine's desperate cries. Genevieve stood in the center of her ancestral home. The air smelled of blood, smoke, and wet fur. But as she looked at Alaric and at King Leander, who watched her with profound, unwavering respect, she felt a profound, settling peace. She reached out, gently placing a hand on Alaric's cheek. He leaned into her touch, the fierce alpha momentarily giving way to the devoted son. "We are home, little wolf," Genevieve whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking across her hardened features. "We are home." The fall of Blackwood Manor marked the end of an era and the terrifying dawn of another. Genevieve did not merely conquer her ancestral home. She forged an unprecedented empire, bridging the savage wilderness of the north with the political cunning of the south. Under the absolute rule of King Alaric, the Iron Fang Pack became the most formidable military force in the known world, feared by kings and revered by those who sought true justice. The name Lady Catherine faded into the obscure, cautionary whispers of tavern tales, a beggar woman who froze to death, clutching phantom gold. But the Iron Mother's legacy endured for centuries. Genevieve proved that while true power might be born in the blood of monsters, it is ultimately honed by the unbreakable will of a mother scorned, transforming a discarded human girl into the immortal architect of a Lycan dynasty